Okay.
Okay, so I've started recording on this computer.
It must be, well, we don't know. It says pause, but it can stop.
Well, those are options to pause or to stop, but it does. There's a little red line there.
So the red line,
a little red dot here. There was an option to say record on this computer, and I clicked it, and it shows a little red dot here, right?
Which red dot shows you're recording? That.
Yeah.
Okay.
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 Right in the middle.
Right, no more.
Oh, let's see if it works. Yeah, it says recording here. Do we leave this bit so big, or should we just go to the small one?
Leave it big on that one and small one.
I remember when.
That's not on.
No. Yes, it is. We're using that camera.
I'm using this camera, are we?
So,
Just checking that you can hear me before I unmute myself.
Yes.
Hi, Leslie.
Hello, Leslie.
can you hear us?
Evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, we have to be looking up at the top camera when we can. Is that all right?
Hi, Tom. Hi, Ben.
David, hi.
Hi, David. How are you?
We've got David over here.
Because he was the last to speak.
No, we'll leave that off, then we can see the screen better. Well, my suggestion is we run till 7:05 and we start at 5 past.
I don't know how many we expect. So, yeah.
12 at the moment. Okay, everybody, we're just waiting for a few more people to join us. I hope you'll bear with us. Oh, judges.
Thank you. Well, if it's all judges, then that makes our job easier.
While we're waiting, just a question. Have coaches been invited to join this?
They had,
event?
yes.
I actually talked to Alfie the other day, but he said he'd think about it for sure.
To send out the invite to competitors and coaches.
Randall made it.
Good man, Randall.
Yeah. I'm going to move that much closer. It's a lot more than shown on here.
still think we should start at 5 past. Can't keep everybody waiting. You agree? Yep.
I don't know how to find this to other than him. Nice to know who's here. Oh, maybe I no, I can press this button, can't I? There are more than 6.
All come.
Ellie, eat properly.
There's a backlog letting people in.
Mm.
A lot of people now.
17, so that's definitely enough to start with, isn't it?
We'll just wait another 15 seconds and we'll go.
Okay, thanks. Sure, as always, people are going to trickle in, but
We better get going.
coming up
It's
to
unfair.
5 past.
Okay,
we've
let's.
obviously
It's 5 past. You've had your 5 minutes. We have quite a reasonable number of people joined already, so I think we'll just start. So this is one of a series of rules training events which Ben and I have been running for HKSF. This evening we're at Royal Hong Kong, and thank you very much to Royal Hong Kong for hosting us. Ben and I will be doing the talking, and in the background, Elsa is working the magic on the Zoom, recording us and everything else. And we hope that at the end of this session, the recording will be available for people to refresh their minds about what we talked about. So this session is intended for all racing sailors, coaches and judges. We certainly want everybody to be working from the same page when we're penalizing competitors for infringements on the water. So we want everybody to share the same information in terms of the definitions of the rule infringements and how we enforce them. So that's tonight. So what we're going to cover, what the rules say, what the interpretations say. Hang on a moment. That's not working. What are the common infringements by each classes, and the on the water judges' roles and Appendix P. So that's what we're aiming at tonight. Let me remind everybody of the fundamental Rule 42, which, paraphrasing it, hang on, Ben's trying. Okay. Next one, Ben. How do we get there? There we go. Okay, I've gone. Yep. So, except when permitted, we can only use the wind or the water to increase, maintain, or decrease speed. That's the basic rule, which is covered in Rule 42.1. It's also allowable to trim or perform acts of seamanship, such as rescuing other boats in danger, or to get yourself off the rocks. And the sailing instructions may or may not have some conditions attached to your use of an engine to do that, but that obviously doesn't apply at this weekend. And also, most importantly, you must not move your bodies to propel the boat. Now, if you don't believe that works, if you're sitting in a chair with wheels, you can find that you can move the chair across the room quite easily by just jerking in the seat. So without touching the floor, you can move the chair, and without touching the water, you can make a boat move. We all know that when people come into the typhoon shelter, they're doing all sorts of things to make the, hang on. Ben screwed me here. Okay, so illegal propulsion works. So we all know that. And within the rules, some limited use of propulsion is permitted. And this talk is all about where those limits are, so that sailors know how far they can go in making the boat go faster, and the judges know when to penalize. And it's also about what the judges will be looking for on each leg of the course, and when they see any particular illegal action taking place. So what we're going to, and I think I've done that one, haven't I?
You use the left and the right.
Okay. Right. So the prohibited actions under Rule 42.2 are pumping, rocking, ouching, sculling, excess tacking, or indeed anything else which propels the boat. And we're going to go through each of those actions, define it, and talk about what is and what is not permissible. So let's start with pumping. So it's important that we're all talking from the same page in terms of how we define infringements. So looking at pumping, pumping is fanning the sail when the mast is not moving from the vertical. So that can be, sails can be fanned by pulling them forcefully in with the main sheet or another sheet or in any other way, or the sails can be flicked by body pumping, which is when the sailor bounces up and down on the windward rail of the boat, and that energy is translated into a flick of the sail. We'll talk about a bit more about that in a moment. What is allowed is one pump of each sail per wave, but only to initiate planing or surfing. And we'll explain if you pump and you don't initiate planing or surfing, then you're getting yourself into the yellow light and eventually a penalty area. One point to note in that is that if you're already planing or surfing, you can't pump again on the wave to try to go a little bit faster. The rule says that one pump is to initiate. So if you don't initiate, or if you, either because it's not, the wind's not strong enough, or because you're already going fast enough, then you've broken the rule. We'll come back to that in a minute. The next prohibited action is rocking. Rocking is an action which causes the boat to roll repeatedly. So a single roll may be allowed, and we'll talk about that. But if the boat is rolling repeatedly, then that's rocking, and that is prohibited in most cases. So in this case, the mast is moving in a vertical plane. The sails do not have to be fanning for it to be rocking. Rocking can be caused by natural events like waves, and that's okay. But it's when the rocking is initiated by the crew's action. So a single roll to facilitate steering is allowed. So if you let the boat heel, the boat is going to come up to windward, and you may be chasing a wave to windward, and that's allowed, and you can pull the boat up when you want to bear away to go down the wave, so that's allowed as well. So you can facilitate steering. You can roll in a tack or a jibe to help you through the tack or jibe, provided the speed of the boat is not increased and that you're not coming out of the tack or jibe at a speed faster than you're going in. That's pretty difficult to judge, and we may talk about that in a minute in the discussion. Ouching, well, we should be clear what ouching is, and that ouching is the way you get your chair to go across the room without touching the floor. You move your body rapidly forwards and you stop, and the boat continues going when you stop. It's the momentum of your movement, and that's not allowed under any circumstances. Tacking or jibing can provide an advantage if you're good at it and you roll well through a tack or a jibe, and you can come out marginally faster after each tack. So repeated tacks which are not related to the wind or to your position relative to the other boats is certainly likely to be studied by the judges, and no exceptions are defined. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. So the final one is sculling, which is very relevant to the dinghies that we have at the upcoming regatta, which is movement of the tiller and rudder, which propels the boat forwards or stops it going astern. So that's any movement. You are allowed, if you're above close hauled, to scull down to close hauled. Once you're down in close hauled, you're not allowed to scull back up to head to wind. You can steer back to head to wind, but not scull back to head to wind. So sculling in both directions is a penalty offence. You can slow the boat down by repeatedly moving the helm and using the rudder as a brake. So that's all right. It's if you're propelling it forward or stopping it from going astern that you're breaking the rules. We'll talk quite a bit more about sculling in a minute. So those are the basic prohibited actions. Other propulsion, as I said at the beginning, is prohibited under Rule 42.1. You may use propulsion to, as it says here, to help a person or a boat in danger or to get clear. And what you can do may be defined in the sailing instructions. Right, so having been very briefly through the fundamental rules, let's start talking about the interpretations and how they're applied. Now, the first thing I would draw everybody's attention to is the document that World Sailing produces. Ben, do you want to hold it up? Which is this document, which you can get from the World Sailing website, which defines in detail the things that you are allowed to do and are not allowed to do. And everybody should have studied that so they understand what the rule says. It's a fairly difficult document to understand. It's not put together in a very comprehensible way. So some of the judges in Asia have put up an alternative presentation of that, which is this document here, which you can get from Ben or myself, I guess, at some point if you ask us, which restates exactly what it says in the interpretations, but in a way that makes it easier to understand. The other things that I would suggest that you do is you look at World Sailing. There's a document covering each of the classes, covering the things which the classes do, which are illegal, and which the judges will probably have studied before they go on the water to judge you. So you'll know there from World Sailing what the judges are looking for. So there are two sets of documents which is worthwhile looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to talk about the illegal activity in more detail. Right, Ben, do you want to take us through pumping?
Okay, look, hi everyone. So as Tom said, there are a few different sorts of propulsion which are not allowed. Sometimes they may be allowed. And so the interpretations document we just looked at actually breaks each one of those down into different types, doesn't it? And as we can see on this slide, there's a couple of different types, particularly of what we call pumping. The first one is sheet pumping. And this is, as Tom alluded to earlier, it's when the main sheet of the sail is pulled,
Or jib.
or any sail, causing a little bit of propulsion. And as we said before, that we're trying to avoid that in the rules. So sheet pumping is generally disallowed. However, there are a couple of times, and I say a couple deliberately, when sheet pumping may be allowed. So once again, sheet pumping, and how do we recognize that as judges? Well, we're going to be looking particularly at the sailor's arm to see if that's pulling the sheet. And often that's our easiest way to see that sheet pumping is going on. The sailor is pulling on a sheet. So what are the times when you are allowed to pump the sheet? Well, as the rule says, and as the slide says, you may pump to initiate planing or surfing. There's a big misconception out there, isn't there, that you can pump once per wave. And I don't really know how that's got out.
Well, then people have only been told about the first part of the rule.
Exactly. So the actual rule says you can pump once to initiate planing or surfing when planing conditions may exist. And if you're unsuccessful that first time, then you can have another go. But as it says on the second attempt, you're starting to get to where we call yellow light or yellow area. We judges say that someone's in the yellow area when we're starting to think that this might be going on a bit too much, and we're looking to see if they're going to try again. So once again, the first attempt to initiate planing or surfing, we're going to let you go with that. That's okay. The second attempt, and if it's unsuccessful, we're going to think, okay, we'll watch this boat very carefully. And if that boat tries a third time and is unsuccessful, then that is definitely a penalty.
Ben, let me just interrupt just to add one further thing there. When we talk about the second attempt, we don't mean a second attempt on the same wave necessarily. It might be the first wave you've tried it and it didn't work. So the next wave it comes along and you try it. So it could be over a string of waves. You might miss the second wave out because it's not very big and try it on the third wave. But if we think that the attempts are close together, then the third attempt is going to get penalized.
Absolutely. So, you know, this once per wave thing, really we need to try and get that out of our understanding, and just one attempt to get on a wave, we'll let you go with that. Second attempt, we're going to be looking at you as a yellow light. Third attempt, 3 tries and you're out. So, and another thing that's important to mention here is that if you are already planing, then you're not allowed to be doing any more pumping. Remember, the rule says only to initiate, to get on the plane or the surf. You're not allowed to pump once you're up surfing or planing.
Right, so the first thing that we would do when we're watching somebody and we think he might be pumping is the judges would talk between themselves and say, is this planing or surfing conditions? Are boats generally in the fleet able to plane or surf? And if they're not, then we know that all pumping attempts are going to be breaking the rule.
Yes. You know, a lot of these propulsion rules actually depend on the conditions, don't they? And it says quite clearly that we can do some of these if it's related to the wind or the waves. Oh, you can't do them if it's not related to the wind and the waves. So the judges are looking at the conditions a lot when they're making judgments on this. Going down this slide, we're talking about...
Just one more thing on sheet pumping. If a power boat goes by you and creates a big wash, then you're perfectly entitled to use the wave from the power boat to try to surf on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be very localized conditions that allow you to do that.
Yeah.
And where we say you can try again later down the leg, that means that it's not defined what that means, but if it's reasonably disconnected from the first attempt, so it's 100 meters, 200 meters further down the leg, and the waves are looking pretty good, and you try again, then you start again with the first attempt.
Yeah, I think it's clear to us whether whether the person is trying to or is gaining speed when there's not really much chance of them getting on a wave, versus they tried maybe up at the beginning of the leg and it wasn't, but then maybe the wind changes, the wind increases, the waves increase, and they are allowed to try again, I think, further down. So going down to body pumping, well, this is where the sailor will move their body maybe up and down or a little bit in and out in order to try and cause that sail to shake. And that shaking of the sail actually drives that sail a little bit. And we call it a flick, because what we can see with that sail, momentarily, that body movement will cause the sail to change its shape, and the leech of that sail may actually flick. And that's a good indicator to the judges that the body is causing that flick. So
yeah, we'll normally be behind the boat that we're looking at, and we'll be in a good position to see if the sail is being affected. I mean, the first thing we would probably see is the guy bouncing up and down on the gunnel.
Yeah.
And then we'd have to ask ourselves, is this something that's causing the sails to flick? And if it is, then it breaks the rule. Maybe this is a good point to talk about technical and tactical infringements. Ben, do you want to talk about that?
yeah, so we judges, we have a name, two names for the types of breach we're looking at and looking for. When a sailor breaks a rule, which is one particularly just to gain an immediate advantage over competitors, so the kind of thing that we see at start lines, to just get that little squirt ahead of the competitors, we call that a tactical breach or tactical foul. And what that means is that it's just a short, quick breach in order to gain that advantage, again, often at the start line. The other kind of breach we're looking for is a technical breach. And now this is more about the sailor's technique, and it doesn't necessarily get them a short, sharp advantage, instant advantage, but over a bit of time would cause them to have an advantage. And a technical breach is ones which are often quite harder to spot, harder to work out. Now that's important because the judges will treat the two kind of breaches differently. If we see a technical breach, we may want the other judge in the boat to offer their opinion. So I might say to Tom, as I'm following a boat or looking over at a boat, I might say to the other judge, what do you think of boat 1462? Have a look at them for me. And the other judge may look at them and go, yeah, I can see, it looks like some body pumping going on. And then we both confirm to each other, and we might go along and actually really look at that boat. So the technical breaches, we take a little bit more time. We try and get some confirmation from the other judge. That's different to the tactical ones at the start line, where we don't have the time to take so much time over it. And it's actually probably pretty obvious. And we will actually blow those up as a single judge. We don't confer. We want to get that advantage away from that boat as soon as we can. So there's two different types. Body pumping and sheet pumping are both probably the kind of, well, they could be either, but normally if we're in a leg, we're looking at a technical sort of breach. Would you agree?
Yeah.
If it's at the start, however, we may be looking at as a tactical. So they can overlap a little bit. So two types of pumping. And we're going to be looking later on in this presentation about the different parts of the course and where each of these breaches might come up. So why don't we move on to the next slide, the next kind of briefing. I do see a question here, which
Well, why don't we deal with the question now?
yeah, I think so. That's a really good question. So we have a question. I'm sure you can all see this chat as well. I think you might be able to. And it's from Gina. Thank you for that. What if it's a super windy day and I'm already fully hiked out? Can I jerk my body down to prevent a capsize to leeward? Or is that still considered body pumping? That's a really good question. And I'll start by saying that the rules don't allow us, the rules allow us to move our bodies if it's connected with the wind and the waves. We're allowed to move our bodies to trim our bodies according to the wind and the waves.
So I would say that's effectively trimming, and that's perfectly allowable.
Absolutely. So remember, if you go to Rule 42 in your rule book, or if you use this interpretation sheet, it will tell you that we can move our bodies according to the wind and the waves. And if you're going to capsize, then surely, yes, you need to put your weight outboard to stop that capsize.
Okay, well, now we're going to talk about rocking or rolling. It's pretty difficult to determine the difference between rocking and rolling. There is a line, though, in the interpretation that defines rocking as being something that causes continuous rolls, so more than one roll.
The great thing about this document is if you have this interpretations document from the World Sailing website, it actually does have a few definitions here and there. And I'm going to read the definition of rolling.
Yes.
Okay. The definition says a roll is a single cycle, and then there's a funny word here called a thwartship. Well, that's a very trendy word for side to side. Yeah. A single cycle movement of a boat during which the mast goes to leeward and back to windward, or vice versa. So basically, if your mast is standing up, if your mast goes down to one side and then the other, that's a roll. A rock is if your mast went from one side to the other and then back again, i.e. a continuous, an extra roll after a roll. So
just so we're all on the same page here, the difference between pumping and rocking is that in pumping, your mast basically stays vertical and the sail moves either by coming in a fanning motion or by flicking. And in rolling, the sail may or may not move, but the whole mast moves from one side to the other. So we got more questions, or?
Something going on, but I'm not quite sure what it says. Anyway, I think we continue.
Okay, let's go on. We will try and answer questions as they come along. Ben, do you want to carry on with that?
Yeah, so rolling, we're talking about. Again, there's sometimes that rolling is permitted. Sometimes it's not, and it's important that we know what times those are. So if we just put a boat on the water with a few waves, that boat is going to do some rolling. And what we call that natural rolling, background rolling. We'll come to that in a moment. I'm going to go through these as the list says. How about that? So the rules do permit one body roll, but no propulsion. Remember, at the beginning of this interpretations, it says, or at the beginning of the rules, it says we can't propel the boat. We've got a question from Leslie in a moment.
Yeah, I found myself at the Optimist Nationals having a big problem with the fact that there were so many powerboats coming through Port Shelter, and there was wind and waves, and it was actually really difficult to define whether it was surfing or not, and which way the waves were going. And I think the participants, the sailors did too. So I'd like your advice on how to manage that.
Well, I think we said that if a wave comes through as a result of a powerboat and a dinghy pumps the surf on that wave, that's perfectly okay. If the waves are confusing and the boat is rolling a lot because of the waves, that's okay as well.
The third, just coming to that, Leslie, the third bullet point says unstable boats. All boats are pretty unstable in wavy conditions. And there is something which is called background rolling, which is allowed. It's okay if the boat is doing that because of the waves or wind, and that's called background rolling. With all of this Rule 42, we want to be absolutely sure as judges that the boat is being propelled by whatever action that sailor's taking. And then in this interpretations, it says the boat is clearly propelled. If it's difficult to ascertain whether one boat is getting clearly propelled, I would be also looking at the rest of the fleet as well, and gauging that boat against the rest of the fleet as a guide as to whether that boat is gaining an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the third bullet point there. It says unstable boat. Boats which roll a lot, the ones that I'm familiar with are the Stars. I don't know, we don't have Stars in Hong Kong, but here's a boat which is sailed very competitively internationally and used to be in the Olympics. And it can be extremely unstable, particularly as on the run, the crew very often stands up and stands on the foredeck holding onto the mast. So the center of gravity of the boat is moved up a lot, and the boat will roll a lot without the any action from the crew. So as long as the crew's not doing anything to make it roll, that's all right. Where it becomes interesting is in a case like that and a boat like the Star, where very small movements by the crew will keep a boat rolling. Once it started rolling, he just moves his head to one side to the other and the boat continues rolling. So we would be watching for, is this boat rolling more than the other boats around it? And if so, can we work out if it's rolling because of the crew's action?
I think what Tom says there is really the key, is whether there's a link between the crew's action and the movement of the boat. We have to make that link. And one thing I look for is whether the boat rolls in the same direction as the crew's movement. If you imagine a sailor moving inboard, if the boat then rolls that direction, normally to leeward, if the crew's body moves to leeward and the boat rolls to leeward, it's likely that the crew has caused that roll. Conversely, if the crew member leans out on the windward side and the boat then follows the crew member's lean, that's probably the crew member that's causing the roll. Take the opposite case, when the crew member, or the boat rather, leans, the boat heels towards the windward side and the crew member leans inwards to stop the roll. That would be a crew member actually just trimming his weight or her weight according to the conditions. So watch very carefully for the direction of the crew member's weight and the direction of the roll. If they're the same, you're probably looking at rolling caused by that crew member. I hope that gives an idea.
Yeah, I guess this is a technical infringement, and both the judges, one judge would see it, because normally the judges are looking in different parts of the fleet. But having seen this boat that's rolling, that judge will call the attention of the other judge, and they'll both look at it, and they'll both be deciding, well, is the rolling caused by the crew's action, or is the crew trying to stop it?
let's work our way down this list a little bit. So we have gusts, similar to Gina's question there. If a big gust comes along, of course, the sailor is entitled then to lean outboard and hold the boat. The fourth one is interesting. The repeated rolling after crew action breaks a rule. And this is a little bit as what I was saying. If the mast is going from side to side, I will be looking very carefully at the crew to see if that crew member is causing that. If the mast is following the crew's body, I'm guessing probably that crew member is causing the roll. Hope that gives...
Well, I think that this one probably refers to the situation where the crew leans in to make an adjustment to the centerboard, and the boat rolls in with him and the crew comes back out. Even if the crew then sits still, the boat may continue to roll for several cycles before it damps down. Now, if he, at that point, if he decides he wants to make another adjustment to the centerboard and he goes in again and just keeps it going, you can make some boats roll really easily with very little movement. We know that optimists can make boats roll by bailing, by the arm going out with the water in it. Well, that's a pretty obvious and extreme example, but other ones can be much more subtle. So
well, I have seen people bailing extensively and no water coming out of their bailer, and that to me is quite a key. When they bail 10 times, there's no water, but the boat's doing this, then that's definitely a whistle for me.
I'm sort of jumping ahead here with something I was going to say later, but the judges are always looking for a boat which is doing something different from the other boats around them. We call it looking for blue cows. So if we see a blue cow on a field, it stands out like a sore thumb. In fact, it stands out like a blue cow. And if we see one boat that's rolling and the rest of the fleet are all steady, then that's the boat we're going to go and have a look at, find out what's going on.
It's actually quite obvious, isn't it, sometimes? Yeah. Okay, so we're going down to the fifth one, rolls to help steering in the waves. Very often when a wave comes behind you, you want to be able to get up that wave and make the best use of that wave action. And we're allowed to roll the boat to steer up that wave. So normally we'll try and heel to leeward and roll up the wave. When we get to the top of the wave, in order that we don't let the wave go below us, past us, we might heel to windward and bear away down that wave. That's okay, you know, and these can be some quite small waves, but steering to help in the waves, or rolls to help steering in the waves is okay. I've just got another question here. It's quite a long one. And I don't know if everyone can see the chat questions, so maybe they can. Maybe you've all read it before I have. Tom, why don't you go ahead and talk about the snaking, and I'll have a quick look at this.
Well, I think we both better have a look at this. So the question is, can we get some standard understanding amongst judges on the acceptable extent of one roll at the start line? Quite standard for optimists to do it, and some be quite pronounced. Well, we are going to cover that in a minute.
Now we are going to cover, remember I said we're going to look at the different parts of the...
So if you don't mind, we'll leave that until we get there. If we haven't answered it when we covered that, then come back and we'll have another go at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Ben has just said that rolling to help steering in the waves is okay, but people sort of understand that heeling the boat and snaking down on the run is sort of the fashion. That's the way you should do it. But if they've seen other people doing it and they copy it, and they do it when there are no waves. So if you're rolling and steering up and steering down, and there are no waves, that breaks the rule. That's not to say that if you legitimately want to get out on the right-hand side of the course, you can't roll to steer out on the right-hand side of the course. But if you change direction very quickly and roll back again down to the left-hand side of the course, then you're snaking, and in the absence of waves, that's a penalty. Okay, Ben, you want to come?
As I mentioned before, background rolling is the natural rolling of the boat in the waves, and that's okay. And we don't have to stop that. We can let the boat do that. The last one at the bottom is rolling, roll tacks and roll jibes. So these are okay. We are allowed to do those, so long as there's not a speed increase. I think it says the boat must come out of that maneuver at the same speed it went in.
It's obviously a pretty difficult thing for judges to gauge whether you have gained speed. We do things like looking at the bow wave on a boat. If the boat comes out of attack with a nice healthy bow wave and it dies away a couple of boat lengths later, we can assume that he slowed down a bit after the attack, and he probably did gain unfairly in the attack. He might not get penalized on that tack unless we're sure, but we're probably watching him. And if we decide after a few tacks that he is overdoing it, then he's going to get penalized.
Yep.
Now, there's one further thing about the rolling in the tack or the jibe, which is that the roll must be completed during the time that the boat is tacking or jibing. So if you do your jibe and you come out and the boat is well heeled, and you wait for a second or two and then pull the boat up, then you're in danger of being penalized. But if you roll during the process of the maneuver, then that's fine. So it must be connected and it must be within the maneuver of the tack or the jibe. So in the tack, it must be before you've gone to your new close hauled course.
Yeah. There's one more as well, which I think is not listed here, but it's quite easy for us judges to see. And that's when a boat is rolling, but actually not changing direction at all. And as it says at the top, or as it said, we can roll the boat to facilitate steering. So if you're rolling and you're going straight, there's no steering happening, and therefore you're breaking the rule.
Absolutely.
And that's really easy for us to see.
That's a really easy one.
You know, so don't go rocking and rolling down the course in a straight line.
As I say, you stand up like
a blue
cow, shall we say, against the rest of the fleet if you're rolling and the rest of the guys are not. And be seen from a long way away. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Ooching.
Well, ooching is, as Tom described, we sit on our chair and we move our chair without putting our feet down. We can actually get quite some way on our chairs. Ooching is the movement of the body, normally forward, and then a stopping very suddenly, and that causes the boat to keep going. And as Tom mentioned earlier, there's no time in the rules where you can ooch.
Yeah, it's often disguised a bit. There used to be a technique that optimists used, which I think was in this part of the world was called the Singapore tack, where as part of the tack, they probably broke another rule as well in terms of the rolling. But as part of the tack, then the crew would move forward. So they jump across the boat, but instead of jumping sideways, they jump forward and hit the thwart in the boat. And that was a sort of disguised ooch in the middle of the tack.
Mm-hmm.
So ooching can be combined with something else and can make it difficult to see. But we are on the lookout for people who are trying to do that.
Yep. Talking is not the kind of thing that we're doing tonight, talking, but this TORQU is basically twisting your body. And it's a kind of ooching, but it's where you twist your body in order to get that momentum and then stop twisting. And that is also not allowed if it's not connected to the waves or the wind.
So talking down properly helps the boat to get over the waves. So you're moving your weight so to make it easier for the boat to go through the waves. If it's in phase with the waves, it's fine. If it's flat water, there's no excuse for doing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this is quite a simple one because there's no really, I mean, it doesn't, yeah, ooching, there's no time you can ooch.
Okay, so now we get on to an interesting one, sculling. Ben.
So sculling, as we said, that's the repetitive, forceful movement of the tiller, which causes the rudder to create propulsion for the boat. Sculling can be done in a straight line, or it can be done to the left or to the right. And so it's quite interesting how the advantages to sculling changes with different boats. I think you already mentioned, or did you mention, optimists? They have a big fat rudder, and sculling actually is quite easy to do and quite effective in an optimist. Maybe for a laser, not so much, but all boats can be sculled. Now, there are times you can scull, or actually there is a scenario where you can scull, and that is if you are above close hauled, you can scull down to your close hauled course. Important here is it says down to a close hauled course. So if you're above close hauled, a little bit on, say, starboard, you can scull across, back down to close hauled on starboard. What you can't do is be below close hauled and scull upwards to close hauled course, or up above close hauled, okay? And another thing you can't do is, well, as it says there, you can't scull from below close hauled. You can't scull in a straight line on a reach, for example, for sure. You can't scull one way and on one tack, a little bit on starboard, and then scull your way across to port, pass head to wind. You can't go back and forth at all. All right, and there was a bit of discussion amongst judges all around the world as to whether that was okay. And I think the consensus is that a boat cannot be sculled from one direction to another, pass head to wind each time, definitely not to hold position.
We see that a lot with in the up to the starts. People trying to hold position on the start line by sculling. And the sculling doesn't have to be repeated, obvious backwards and forwards tiller. They can give one big scull, which pushes the boat up. And then if it looks like it's being pushed the other way past head to wind, a big scull the other way, which pushes it back to head to wind. So keeping the boat head to wind by sculling is definitely breaking the rule.
Absolutely. The fourth point there, sculling against the back sail. So sometimes a way of holding position is to push forward on the boom and back the sail, and you can actually scull against that back sail, and you could even move sideways. We call that crabbing, and that's not allowed at all. Just while we're on that point, for sailors who want to know how the judges can recognize this, what I look for is I look for the hand on the sail. I can see very easily whether that sail is full, going backwards, and sculling at the same time. So if your hand is holding that sail full, backing, and you're sculling, you're probably breaking a rule.
Doesn't have to be a hand, it could be your head or your shoulder.
I've seen sailors exactly using their shoulder, trying to disguise the fact that they're backing the sail, but actually it's easy. Whatever they're using, I can quite easily see the sail itself is full and going backwards. I can see the hand working out down here. on the tiller, and that will be a whistle, and it will be a very quick whistle. It will be one of those tactical penalties where I'm not even going to talk to my other judge. I'm just going to blow it up and whistle it. Because we want to get that boat who's getting that advantage, we want to take their advantage away from them right at this important time of the race. So we don't hang around.
Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about sculling when we talk about what we do in each position on the course. Okay, so one of the things we see, again, particularly with the Optimist fleets, but we can see other fleets occasionally doing it, is that somebody is tacking or jibing more often than the fleet around them. And if they're good at doing it, they will gain a little bit of distance in each tack, and you'll see that they're gradually creeping up through the fleet or extending a lead at the front. So if you see that, then it's really one of those technical rule infringements that both judges will look at and decide, well, is he tacking too often or not? I mean, it's obviously quite all right to tack if you're tacking on top of somebody else, or tacking to get clear of dirty wind, or tacking because there's a wind shift. But if the guy is tacking and you can't see any clear reason for it, and he seems to be going better than the rest of the fleet, then there has to be a big question about it.
Yep.
Okay, so now we get on to some further exceptions, which some of the classes allow. Now, there are no exceptions in Optimists, there are no exceptions in lasers, there are in 420s and there are in 470s. I guess everybody has to know their class rules. Each of the classes has a different set of exceptions. So in some, you're allowed to do anything you like after the start if the wind strength is 12 knots, and other ones you can do one thing after the start and one thing before the start. So it's quite complex, and it would certainly take a lot of time to describe it if we went through each of the things now. So you need to check the class rules. The judges will certainly look at the class rules and will be aware of what you're allowed to do. Now, Ben's going to tell us how the race committee tell us whether the class rules apply or not.
So the two flags there, we have the Oscar flag, the O flag, and if that O flag is flying, if Oscar is flying, then whatever class rules allow for relaxation of the propulsion rule 42 rules, those are switched on. You can do the pumping if your class rules allow it. You can do whatever the class rules allow. And that's great. It's really good that the classes, some of the classes have developed these, because it means that those boats can go a little bit faster. They can take advantage of the high winds, and it's a lot more fun and exciting for those classes. I was watching the Finns the other day, and they really go for that pumping when the Oscar is on, and it makes a big difference. If the conditions change back maybe to the lighter conditions, or the ones where they don't want you to be using those propulsion techniques, then a Romeo is flown on the committee boat. So it really is important that you check the class rules, you know the class rules of the class which you are sailing in, and you also watch the committee boat to see if you're allowed to pump. It would be a shame if Oscar was flying in a class where you're allowed to pump and you hadn't noticed that. So I think that's about
okay.
it.
I think
Yeah.
that's that one. Okay, well, that's really our pass through the prohibited actions. So now we're going to talk a bit more about judges on the water, and then what we do at each leg of the course. So first of all, a question that's often asked is, there are only perhaps 2 judge boats, maybe even only 1 judge boat on a course, and is it fair when judges only see a small part of the fleet. Well, obviously, we can't have enough judges to be all the way around the fleet. Many of the infringements are noticeable from quite a distance away. As I say, you can see a boat rolling even if it's at the other end of the run. So many of them, the judges can see a lot further than you think. It's really a bit like speed cameras on the road. You don't have speed cameras the whole way on a highway, only in 1 or 2 places. But if you get caught by the speed camera, you get penalized. And maybe you don't always know where the speed camera is, and you don't always notice where the judge is. So it's a judge's job to try and make the competitors aware of them, to discourage infringement, and to penalize them when they see it. As we said earlier, the judges are looking for blue cars. It's usually pretty easy to see somebody who's infringing. Now, the other thing I would say is that we very often notice that some sailors are very active in the boats. They're either very close to the limit, or they infringe quite a lot, and they naturally become judges' targets. I think we should try to keep our vision as broad as possible, but we're aware that 2834 is it's pretty dodgy, or he was in this race. We didn't actually catch him pumping, but we'll have a look at him in the next race. So judges can remember the boats that are active. They usually stand out pretty clearly as well, and the judges will be looking for the active sailor. So it behoves the sailor to try to be discreet if they want to try and make sure that they utilize the rules to the maximum. I won't say break the rules, because we certainly don't want them to do that. But
I think it's important to note a couple of things. So the judges are there to try and help the people doing it right win. We're there for those competitors who are abiding by the rules. We're not out there to single out anyone, and we're not out there to certainly pick on anyone and make their life harder unless they deserve it. So, you know, what we do is we put ourselves in positions where we can expect Rule 42 breaches happening. So start line, we watch very carefully. We position ourselves on the race course, sometimes right in the middle of all the boats, so that we can see most of the action going on. And as Tom said, we can be right in the middle of a downwind and see quite a long way up and downwind. So we put ourselves in a position where we can see boats. Another thing that Tom mentioned is that we do get to know the sailors as judges. We get to know them by their numbers, sometimes only by their numbers, but we get to see a sailor who might be catching our eye, and we might be looking at that sailor a bit harder as in the next couple of races. So, you know, we are there. The main thing is that we are there to help those people who are doing it properly. There's a couple of comments here. Scull one from Howard. Scull one. She may scull to turn to a close haul course on either tack. Seems to suggest a boat can scull pass head to wind to the other side. That's where the big discussion comes in, Howard, as to what exactly that meant. I think absolutely definite is you could scull. You definitely can't go from one side back to the other and back again.
That's the point.
Yeah, you can't go from left to right and then left again. Absolutely. You could be above close hauled here on a little bit to starboard, and are we saying can scull to end up on port?
That's all right.
Port.
That's
yes,
all right.
you can. So does that answer your question? If you are a little bit on starboard and you got there fairly, you sailed up, and then you decided you needed to scull from that little bit of starboard all the way to the port, close hauled, that would be okay. But our point is that you can't go from one side to the other and back again, holding your position at the start line. Okay. So yes, we're trying to be fair. We're trying to look at it all. We're also there as deterrent, and we very often position ourselves in the middle of the fleet just so that people can see us. And you know, imagine all the Rule 42 breaches that we're saving just by the fact that people can see us plonked right in the middle of the downwind. So I very often say to people, judges that I'm with, and myself, put myself in a visible place on the course, and hopefully that will reduce some of the Rule 42 breaches. Shall we move on?
Yeah, so let's just look at what is the penalty process. So if a judge has decided that somebody's breaking Rule 42, what do? So they blow the whistle. It should be they make sure to have a really good, decent, penetrating whistle, and put out a pretty long blast on the whistle. Point the flag towards the boat that they're going to penalise, and drive over to them. They could be quite a long way from them. They might have to drive quite fast to get to them. And normally one of the things we try to teach judges is not to make wash to disturb the other sailors. Well, this is one occasion when a little bit of wash may be excused if they have to get through the fleet to get to somebody on the other side that they saw breaking a rule. So continue pointing the flag until they get to the infringing boat, and then hail the number. And they're required to hail the number and do all of those things for it to be valid. Yeah. So then what does the competitor do? Well, hopefully, first of all, before I just go through these, the competitor has read the sailing instructions, because quite often the sailing instructions do alter the penalties in Appendix B a little bit. But this is what it says in the rules. So if it's the first time you've been called in a regatta, in a race, then you're required to take a 2-turn penalty, and the penalties must be completed before finish line, before you cross the finish line. If you don't do the 2 turns, then the outcome is that you're disqualified in that race. And the 2 turn, and you must get clear as soon as you're informed of the offence. So get clear so that you can do your turns.
Leslie put her hand up.
Hey, let's finish this bit first, and then we'll come back to Leslie. So the second offence, if you're penalised, you retire from the race. You sail off the race course. If you don't sail off the race course, you will be disqualified, or in fact scored DNE in that race. So it's a worse penalty than just being disqualified. In the third offence, you sail off the course and you're scored DNE, do not exclude. If you don't take that penalty on the water, you can be disqualified from the regatta, and the rules suggest that you may be facing a possible Rule 69 penalty as well. You may be impeding other boats who are continuing to sail, and Rule 69 would be applied. So that's just the process of giving somebody a penalty. Right, Leslie's question.
I am totally against the situation we have in Hong Kong, where we change the rule about penalties. I think that Alfie is also with me on this, because when you go to international regattas, you have to apply the real racing rules of sailing. And Alfie personally talked to me about the fact that he had one competitor who didn't understand that they had to retire, otherwise they got a D&E. I think we should actually apply in Hong Kong all the racing rules of sailing when we're doing the
Okay, Leslie, this
yellow
is
flag.
not an issue for this particular forum. You should discuss this
Yeah.
in
Really?
the race management group.
I think what is an issue is that what Leslie's talking
Really?
about is that some sailing instructions do
Delete the third offence.
dumb down that third offence in Hong Kong. We do have that.
And the organising authority is completely entitled to do that in accordance with the rules. It's one of the rules that can be changed, so they're not breaking any rules by making that change. So there's nothing that we as judges can do about it other than recognise that it may not be a desirable practice.
So I think it's a valid discussion, Leslie. We might take that up in another forum, but so long as people realise, particularly sailing in Hong Kong, to read their sailing instructions, particularly about that third offence on that page, because sometimes it is changed.
It does get changed overseas as well, incidentally, in some events.
Yeah, no, we can talk about that at another time. I hear what you're saying, Leslie. Is your hand still up, or you? Okay.
Okay, right. So Ben, tell us what you do at the start as a judge.
Okay. So, do we need to move the slide on? Or
We probably should, yeah.
So
Okay.
at the start, there's quite a lot going on, and it's all happening quite quickly. And it's important that the sailors know what we're looking for and how we're doing it. So normally we have two boats on the start line, both umpire boats or judge boats on the start line, watching the start, because there is a lot going on. If I'm on the start line and I have chosen myself to be, or we have chosen my boat to be on the right-hand end, that means I'm going to be looking very closely at the boats as they stack up to start at the committee boat end, and that's often the busiest end. We'll put ourselves maybe 50 meters behind the start, and slowly as the start time comes closer, we'll probably move a little bit closer to the line so we can get a really good picture at the sterns of all the boats, an idea of what's happening. Normally about a minute or so, or 2 minutes beforehand, the boats are trying to hold position. So very, very, very particularly there, I'm looking at the boats for sculling, because that's often what's going to be happening. They're going to be sculling left and right, back and forth across coast hold, trying to keep their position on that start line. And as we said, the tactical penalties, the tactical breaches, we'll just whistle straight away. We want to get that advantage the boat has gained eradicated. So as the start times come a bit closer, the boats are starting to consider their trigger pull. That's when they want to get their best speed at the time of the gun. Some boats will have worked out themselves a bit of space to leeward. And these boats, as the clock's counting down, they may start using their tiller to scull down towards their close hold, and a couple of them might even scull past close hold. So from my position, just a few meters behind them at the start line, I can see very clearly whether that boat is sculling past close hold and trying to get a bit of speed on their reach before they come up to close hold with the gun. So again, sculling is something I'm looking at. Now, I saw a question earlier on the chat about this pump at the start, and there's quite a lot of confusion about how and how much a boat can heel and pump at the start. So if we think about it carefully, the boats may roll to facilitate steering. If you're below close hauled, you might need to roll your boat, or you might want to roll your boat a little bit to facilitate steering back up to close hauled. But that heel, that roll that the person does, has to be comparable to the amount of turn that they're going to do. So I'm watching for someone who might try and heel their boat hugely, massively to leeward. It's almost right on its ear, just for that small turn up to close hauled. If they over roll it to leeward and then they jump hugely up onto their weather rail and they squirt out in front of their competitors, then that, I think, would be clear to me that that boat has been propelled by that move. On the other hand, if they roll reasonably to leeward and then they move their weight back up to windward as the gun goes off, and they're sort of similar to other competitors who have done the same thing, then I would say it's not that clear and I wouldn't whistle that. So in answer to the question earlier, how much is allowed on that trigger pull? Well, certainly it's got to be comparable to the amount of heel that you have. Oh, sorry, the amount of turn you have to make. And quite often we're going to be looking at the other boats around. If you end up a meter ahead of the other boats around you, probably you're a little bit over the top, a little bit aggressive with your flattening the boat, and that would bring you a whistle.
No, that's exactly what I would say as well. You're perfectly allowed to pull the boat up and get the boat up to normal close hauled speed as quickly as you can by one roll and a pump at the start. But any more than that, if your boat pops out in front of the line, then you're likely to be penalized. It's a one-shot call.
It is. It's a very quick call that the judges have to make. And one thing I must mention here, that sometimes, occasionally, not often, occasionally there's a judge on the committee boat who might be able to see quite clearly ahead. So, you know, we've got judges all over the place at the start time. We've got another boat probably down looking at the pin. But that's where I'd be at the boat end. I'd be looking for that pump. And you know what happens quite often is, in the excitement of the start, a lot of sailors might do that second pump. Right after the first one, they think they got away with the first one, and I look for a second, they go for a second one, and that's actually quite easy to see as well. So those are the main things at the start line: the sculling to hold position, sculling to back a sail, sculling against a sail to maybe crab up to windward, sculling past close hauled. Remember, sculling to close hauled is okay. Sculling past close hauled is not okay to gain speed. And that huge big rock, the huge big heel to leeward, and then jump up to your windward rail to get that boat going. And you squirt out in front of your competitors. And then the second pump after the start. Those are all the things which I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think the other thing, you probably mentioned it, but sculling when the boats are reaching across below close hauled, the fleet is sort of running down the line a bit, and they're all together, and one boat in the middle wants to try and get clear and does a few quick forceful sculls, try to get his bow clear. That's something which, if we can see it, we make a very quick decision on.
Yeah. So in answer to that earlier question, I think it's quite easy to see if one boat gains a lot. And as it says in the interpretations, if that clearly propels the boat, and if they've gained a lot, then they clearly have been propelled, then that would be a whistle. As it says on the third bullet point there, it's a quick individual decision by the judge. We don't even discuss those. It's a tactical breach, and we want to get that tactical breach advantage out of that boat straight away by whistling straight away. Yeah. So I hope that answers the questions. And
Howard, is that okay for you?
And gives an idea of all the
yes,
things.
thank you. It's okay.
Yeah. at the start time. It's quite exciting for the judges.
Okay, let's move on. Time is going. So on the beat, what are we looking for on the beat then?
Again, as it's, I mean, it's quite a long list, but actually I think the main things are, like it says, the pumping, well, all of these things, the excessive tacks, you know, particularly if the wind dies down and some of these techniques become more and more of an advantage. So if it's quite breezy, we might be not expecting so many excessive tacks. They're probably slower for the boats, but we would be expecting maybe some pumping to take advantage of little gusts here and there.
Now, from the competitor's point of view, just to give you an idea of where the judges are going to be, if we've got two judges on the start line, probably the one at the pin end is going to stay with the left-hand side of the fleet up towards the windward mark, and they're going to position themselves somewhere to leeward of the reaching leg, close to the windward mark, where they're above the port ley line, and so out of danger of being an infringement to the an obstruction for the port ley line boats, and they can see the boats round the mark and start down the leg, the reaching leg, and they can see the boats from leeward on the reaching leg. The other boat, the right-hand committee boat end of the start line, is going to concentrate on going up the right-hand side of the course and will be above the mark, looking for the pumps at the mark. And although the judges are not calling infringements at the mark, they are in a position to see anything that happens, and if they're called as a witness in a protest, they're in a good position to clarify what happened. So that's where you could expect to see the judges on that first beat. And then the judges will go off with the one that was to leeward of the reaching leg, carrying on with the first group of the reachers. Depends how bunched together they are, but using discretion, carry on with the below the fleet, and then cut the corner, and so that they're at the next mark, so they're in a position to see the boats running down towards them on the run. And the outside the windward mark will go down to windward of the fleet and come down with the second part of the fleet on the run. So those give you some idea of positions, so you know what to expect.
I mean, I think what we're doing is we try to, as the two judge boats on the water, we're trying to cover as much as we can, cover the hot spots as well. And talking about the hot spots, one area we see a little bit of sculling happening is at the windward mark. If someone hasn't quite made the ley line and they try and shoot that windward mark and they can't quite make it. So we're looking for sculling up there as well. But we do try and spread ourselves out. We're also going to keep a little bit of an eye on the lead pack. You know, these are the race is important for everyone, but we want to make sure the correct boats are the ones winning the races. And so as the regatta goes on, we might actually keep one boat watching that lead pack very closely. And as I said, on the downwinds, we put ourselves in very visible positions right in front of the sailors to be that deterrent and make sure everyone knows we're there.
Okay, so just down the reach then. What are we on the reach?
On the reach, there's not much happening, is there? There's mainly really pumping, you know, body pumping on the reach. There's not much in the way of tacking and jibing, of course. So a little bit of rocking, as it says, if it's light. And
maybe some sculling as well. I mean, you can get all of these infringements on all the legs, frankly, but
if it's really light. And remember, this is also similar to the reach at the finish as well, same sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's a bit special, the reach to the finish.
So that reaching leg across the top of the course towards the downwind, yeah, we're just looking to see pumping and mainly body pumping, I think.
Okay, so On the run,
On the run, there's quite a lot that can go on, actually. You know, we're looking, and this is really where things seem to be a little bit slower. Boats are actually moving quicker, but things seem to have slowed down. It's not as exciting as a beat and what have you. So there's potential for more to happen, particularly sheet pumping, not so much body pumping, just sheet pumping, rocking, rolling, excessive tacking, and excessive jibing. You know,
with all that stuff we talked about, rocking and making the boat roll in the absence of waves and all of that. That's when all of that applies. It's on this leg.
And actually, on a run, it's quite easy to see things happening from a long distance. You can put yourself right upwind or right downwind, and you can single out a sail which is doing more, or a body on a sailor which is doing more than the rest. And then we would probably go and have a look at that boat for maybe 10, 15 seconds. Look at them. We try not to overlook at one boat. We don't want to give anyone bad wind as we're above them. So we try and think about that. So for those sailors that are going to try this stuff, well, you know, if we go and have a look at you, and I would say we're probably not going to watch a single boat for too long. We want to be fair and watch the whole fleet.
Well, one exception is the last item there, is one boat going faster than the rest of the fleet. If one boat, I mean, they may just have a faster boat and be better sailors, but if we see one boat that's clearly going faster, then we're going to have a really good look at it and see if we can see any reason why they are going faster. Okay, now there's a very special situation on that little reach from the bottom mark to the finish. Very often people are trying to get on the wind of the guy outside them at the mark, and try to get the overlap, try to get that last place back, or stop the one outside from getting the place. So it can be quite competitive on that last reach, and we do have to have a really good look at it. So there's the pump or the rock, as they go around that last mark from the run up onto the reach, how have they transitioned between the run with the sail right out and the reach, which can be tightish sometimes. And what are they doing to try to get onto or out of the wind of the guy nearby them? So there could be pumping or all sorts of other stuff.
Body pumping is quite common on that, isn't it? When you want to get that just one place, you can see it's very close between your third and fourth position or something, and you want to do everything you can to get that one place against the guy that's next to you or the lady that's next to you. So we do see quite a lot, and that's why you'll often see the jury boats following the boats on that leg quite closely. And you know, we may follow just behind the lead pack to windward, or we may be, depending on how things are how we got there, we might be just behind that lead pack to leeward, but we'll be quite close just to make sure that people aren't trying to get that extra place.
Okay, so I just wanted to have one last recap on the penalties, because there's nothing that we hate more than to find that somebody's been disqualified or scored DNE or something because they don't understand the penalties. So just go through the penalties again, and I take what Leslie said, that she doesn't like the alteration to the sailing instructions, but we have to go with the penalties which are defined. So in the absence of any changes, the first penalty, if you're penalized and your number is called, you should sail clear and do your turns. In the second penalty, if you had one already in the regatta, not just in the race, it's in the regatta. If you've had one before, you retired from the race or you're scored DNE. And in the third one, you retire from the race or you're scored, and you will be scored DNE. or you're disqualified from the whole regatta. Let's hope Rule 69 doesn't get there. Now, what I would say as well is, if you've been penalised in the race, then it's a very good idea to find the judge who gave you the penalty and go alongside him and say, well, what did I do wrong? Because you can learn from that. The judges should be expecting you to come and talk to them. They're certainly told that they have to account for their actions, as it were, by explaining to the competitor why they penalise them. So do go alongside the judges and ask them what went wrong. I'm sure they'll try to find you if they can, but after the race, boats are milling around all over the place. So that really is it for us. We've managed it in our 90 minutes. So the only thing is, are there any more questions? We're very happy to take questions for as long as you guys want to stay.
Doesn't look like there's any more questions on the chat. Can you explain a bit on the snaking technique on the run?
Okay, well, snaking is just a way of describing the course that a boat is taking. So it's perfectly allowable to heel the boat in order to steer the boat. And if there are waves, it's perfectly allowable to heel the boat and steer to get across onto the front of a wave. And when you're on the front of the wave, to bear away by pulling the boat to windward on top of you and going down with the wave. So that process of the boat going from one side to the other with the waves is what we call snaking. Now, if you do that and there are no waves, then effectively you're doing exactly the same as you are by rolling without altering course. You're altering course with no good reason.
Your rolling is not facilitating your steering.
Precisely. Now, if there's a legitimate, so if you do that and it's connected, close together, the change in direction one way and back again within tens of meters or so, then we would call that snaking, and that in flat water, that's breaking the rule. There's nothing stopping you if you decide that the wind is better out on the starboard side from heeling the boat, sailing over the starboard, and 200 meters out from changing course and going downwind over there, or even coming back again. That we would not penalize, because we would not say that is connected rolling. It's just steering from a tactical point of view. I don't know, has that answered your question?
I think one of the key is that there's so much good information online, a lot of videos, YouTube, what have you, and assistance to sailors, judges, and coaches about these Law 42s. There's a lot of resources to learn a little bit more. For the sailors, come and talk to the judges at the event. You know, if you ask us a question, we'll always be happy to talk about it and answer, not only if you've been penalized, but if you're just interested. Otherwise, go online, have a look at all the videos. I saw some excellent videos the other day on the Fin class website, just showing some of these videos that you can watch. So I think if there's no more questions, we've been on a good long time. We'd certainly like to thank ALSA and the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club for putting this one together. Thank you so much. Thank you all, you guys, the coaches, the judges that have joined, and the sailors. It's very important, and we decided to get everyone together and allow everyone to see this, because it's important that we all have the same information. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to contact the clubs or us via the clubs, I guess, and we'll try and answer them. So thanks again.
That's it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Ben, and
Well,
thank you, Elsa. Elsa's responsible for all the technical.
No. No, she has. She's put all the technical together, which is brilliant. So thank you. Let's work out how to stop this. And I think, Elsa, thank you very much.